All eyes on America's banking system. That's after the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, or SVB. But China is also watching closely. It's the biggest bank failure in the U.S. since 2008, with over $200 billion in assets on the line. But the companies hit aren't just in America. Several Chinese startups are also embroiled in the fall. One sector alone has hundreds of millions at stake. A look at SVB's website notes its history of operating in China, going back decades. What does all this mean, not just for America, but also Chinese firms? What do you think? Let us know below, and subscribe if you haven't already. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Silicon Valley Bank, or SVB, has collapsed. With $212 billion in assets, SVB marks the largest U.S. bank failure since 2008. The news is making waves in America, with ripples also spanning across the Pacific to investors and startups in China. Chinese biotech companies alone have more than $240 million deposited in the bank. SVB's website says it's been operating in China for more than 20 years through a Chinese joint venture. It was popular among China-based venture capital firms and was one of the first banks to serve Chinese startups. A dozen Chinese firms have issued statements since SVB collapse. Most are biotech companies trying to pacify investors and clients. That's by saying their exposure to the bank was limited. Among the hardest hit company is BeiGene, one of China's largest cancer-focused drug makers. It said Monday it had more than $175 million in uninsured cash deposit at SVB, representing about 4% of its cash and short-term investments. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration recently approved a drug from BeiGene for treating a certain type of leukemia. In second place, biotech company Bribio is also taking a major hit. It had $42 million cash and short-term investments in SVB. That money makes up about 9% of the company's cash deposits. Bribio was part of the effort to launch the first combination therapy for COVID-19 in China. And another pharmaceutical firm, Zai Lab, announced that its cash deposit at SVB were immaterial at about $23 million. These three Chinese companies, plus others, say SVB's closure won't impact their operations or payroll. Over 3 million toys from China are being recalled. That's after the deaths of 2 children. That's according to a recent notice published by the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, or CPSC. The Calico Critter toys came as part of a set with baby bottle and pacifier accessories. A New Jersey company imported the toys from China and says it's aware of 3 incidents involving the pacifier accessory, including 2 deaths. Amazon and Walmart sold the toys between 2000 and 2021. The CPSC says consumers should take the toys away from children immediately and contact the company for instructions on how to receive a free replacement. And this isn't an isolated incident. Toys coming out of China have been coming under increasing scrutiny over the years. That's because 85% of the toys sold in the U.S. are made in China. According to global economic consulting firm NIRA, nearly all toy recalls in 2007 were made in China, accounting for a whopping 98%. A Chinese rocket broke up in space, and its debris took an uncontrolled plunge back to Earth, landing in a rural area of Texas. NTD's Sam Wang has more.
The rocket had launched in June last year, carrying 3 military surveillance satellites. Those devices were aimed at the South China Sea. Up to this point, China has neither addressed the unplanned re-entry nor shared trajectory data with the U.S. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson has been critical of China in the past, calling out Beijing on carelessness and a lack of transparency. So far, no debris has been found. Officials suspect it could have fallen anywhere within a radius spanning hundreds of miles. This isn't the first time China has faced criticism for its spacecraft remnants. Just last year, pieces of a Chinese rocket booster plunged into the Pacific Ocean after a similar uncontrolled re-entry. Despite no immediate reports of damage, it led to a closure of Spanish airspace, causing massive delays for hundreds of flights. For most countries, re-entry plans are required for spacecraft. That's to prevent leaving an excessive amount of space debris in lower orbit. Doing so could eventually lead to debris collision with satellites. It would also pose great danger to civilians if pieces of space junk unexpectedly fall back to Earth.
A Great Wall of Steel. That's what Chinese leader Xi Jinping intends to make China's military into. Xi spoke Monday at the closing of China's annual rubber stamp parliament meeting. It marked his first appearance since securing his president-breaking third term as head of the Chinese Communist Party. In his speech, Xi emphasized military modernization and development and called on the regime to step up its management and control of both national and public security. He also said China must achieve greater self-reliance in science and technology. That message comes amid tensions with Washington as it works with allies to block Chinese access to chip-making equipment and other cutting-edge technology. According to Xi, pro-Beijing nationalism will usher China into the future, including bringing Taiwan under mainland Chinese control. Beijing has boosted diplomatic and military pressure on the island in recent years. Add that to its refusal to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it sparked fears of a possible war on Taiwan. Taiwan's defense spending has a new direction. In a report, the island's military said it would focus this year's resources on preparing for a total blockade of the Taiwan Strait by China. That means replenishing artillery, rocket stocks, and parts for F-16 fighter jets. The goal, to strengthen combat continuity. The ministry also said it would include priority funding for U.S.-made weapons. That's including Stinger anti-aircraft missiles and HIMARS mobile rocket launchers. Beijing staged war games around Taiwan in August. Troops fired missiles over Taipei and declared no-fly and no-sail zones around the area. It was largely seen as a simulation of how the regime would seek to cut Taiwan off from foreign aid in a war. The Chinese Communist Party views Taiwan as part of its territory, though it has never ruled the island. The Chinese regime has threatened to take control of the island by force if necessary. For the first time ever, the head of the Pentagon will have to deal with a Chinese counterpart sanctioned by the U.S. Beijing appointed a new defense minister on Sunday, along with 4 vice premiers. The new defense chief, Li Shangfu, is on a U.S. blacklist for buying Russian weapons. What sets Li apart is his technical background. Li used to be an aerospace engineer, and he once led a Chinese military branch responsible for speeding up China's space and cyber warfare capabilities. Li's appointment comes as Washington pushes to restore military communication with China. That stopped after former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan last August. Responding to Li's appointment, a Pentagon spokesperson said the U.S. military could not comment on media reports about China's leadership changes. He added that the DoD had been clear about wanting to maintain communications with the Chinese military. As Cold War fears grow between Washington and Beijing, negative feelings about China are spiking among U.S. citizens. A Gallup poll last month found only 15% of Americans hold a favorable view of China, meaning 4 out of 5 think poorly of it, a historic high. This trend is taking hold across party lines too, from Republicans to Democrats to independents. Of the 3, Republicans gave the lowest positive rating at a mere 6%. What's more, about 2/3 of those surveyed see Beijing's military buildup as a major threat. Meanwhile, support for Taiwan is surging in the U.S., with close to 80% favoring the self-governed island. That's the highest score since Gallup began tabulating the value in 1996. Lockdown is coming back to a Chinese city. Officials say they are dealing with a flu outbreak, but residents are worried about a return of the zero COVID-19 policy. Here's the latest.
With patients again flooding fever clinics in Chinese hospitals, the northern city of Xi'an launched a contingency plan. It seeks to combat what the city called a flu pandemic. The scheme allows officials to shut down areas of the city in case of severe outbreaks. Measures include school and business closures and a ban on mass gatherings. Home to a population of 13 million, Xi'an was the first city in China where the Omicron variant emerged in late 2021. Now, new controls similar to those devised for COVID-19 are unsettling the public.
There seems to be a spike of flu infections in many regions. Some people suspect that the influenza A might still be COVID-19, only that the CCP has changed its name.
According to former U.S. Army microbiologist Sean Lin, COVID-19 remains widespread in China. Some reports even say makeshift hospitals are still being built.
Have you ever heard about any government building a quarantine facility for flu outbreak?
In China's capital, Beijing, a hospital reported over 400 people waiting in line one morning. Most infections were among children.
A lot of people. We've been accepting quite a number of patients lately. All of them are children with fever and flu symptoms.
In eastern Zhejiang province, another hospital received 4,000 patients in just one day, half of them flu patients. Hospitals in Shanghai saw similar overcrowding. Other videos on social media captured outbreaks in Hebei, Henan, Tianjin, and more areas. An expert says influenza does hit China this time of year, but with COVID-19 dominating the past 3 years, there were no reports of large-scale flu outbreaks.
It's impossible to tell the difference between influenza A and COVID-19 by clinical symptoms because they are similar. The only way to precisely distinguish them is through antigen testing or nucleic acid testing.
Tong added, the sudden flare-up is fueling doubts about Beijing's transparency on COVID-19 and other data.
Two mortal enemies in the Middle East have resumed diplomatic relations. Iran and Saudi Arabia announced the news on Friday. This comes after secret talks mediated by China. An expert says it's a sign of China's increasing influence in the oil-rich region, something that holds significant meaning for the U.S. NTD's Arlene Richards reports.
After years of tension over the war in Yemen, Saudi Arabia and Iran announced on Friday that they will resume diplomatic relations. But what's even more significant is China's involvement in mediating the deal.
This is, very simply put, this is a Chinese move to demonstrate that they're really the world leaders that can bring countries together that are diametrically opposed.
China expert John Mills said he was shocked because these two countries have been mortal enemies. He said their agreement shows the ineffectiveness of President Biden.
I mean, he's been totally over the top, unfriendly toward the Saudis. So the Saudis are naturally going to seek other superpowers to work with.
Saudi Arabia is the world's top oil exporter. Mills said the United States has disliked Saudi Arabia since the Obama years. Now, China is a major player.
Well, they need the oil desperately. They're getting it now, but it has to go through the Straits of Malacca by Indonesia and Singapore. It's extremely vulnerable. This secures the land bridge over Afghanistan, which the Biden team messed up also, and the pipeline being built from Iran to China. And now they can just, Saudi Arabia doesn't even have to ship the oil. They can just connect to the same pipeline. And it goes straight. Now China has energy security.
The White House National Security Council is aware of the renewed ties and said they're hopeful this will help to de-escalate tensions in the Middle East. Mills said the White House is seriously misunderstanding how this relationship affects Americans. For Americans watching this who don't quite understand how international relations affect them on a personal level, can you comment on how this could play out and affect Americans at some point in the future?
The problem is when China is now the dominant partner for Iran and Saudi, that begins to squeeze the Europeans, the South Americans, other Asian countries, and so it increases prices on fossil fuels. So it drives up prices for everybody. It increases uncertainty. It pushes other countries into the Chinese hemisphere, out of our hemisphere, out of our sphere of influence.
Meanwhile, White House clean energy czar John Podesta remarked Thursday that Chinese renewable energy companies will play a major role in future U.S. energy production. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
On Monday, Chinese leader Xi Jinping called for his country to play a bigger role in managing global affairs. That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for 2 years. Here's what to look out for in our second half. Is China really opening up, as its new vice premier promised?
I don't think they're really opening up. I think they're trying to convince countries to invest. I think they're trying to convince countries to trade because they know that's where their money comes from. But at its base, they want to keep growing economically and putting that money into their military, which they will then use in their idea to take over Taiwan.
We sat down with Anders Kaur, publisher of the Journal of Political Risk, to get details on how the Chinese Communist Party is sanction-proofing its economy and about what would happen to the $2 trillion worth of U.S. assets in China if war broke out. The full episode is available on our partner platform, Epoch TV. To sign up, click the link down below. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. See you tomorrow.